Chag Sameach. It's Passover once again. I sat in the same chair a year ago thinking I was doing something that would only be done once in all of Jewish history, a digital Seder, because the pandemic was at its beginning, and we thought surely by summertime we'd be back at our tables together again. It's been a year, it's been a journey. We've been on our own exodus. And I have to say there have been some silver linings in this as well. Families have found new ways to come together. And I hope that you will use this digital Haggadah to be an instrument for you to bring your family together, even if it's over a Zoom conversation. We've learned that being together is essential. We've also learned that we're inextricably tied one to another. The power of this holiday is so profound. As we begin this evening, I have to remember in my own mind the many people that we've lost. As I make this recording, it's the week that we have commemorated that 500,000 Americans have lost their lives. We have to recognize that this pandemic has taken tremendous toll, but we also know that we come together for Passover, that there is hope and that there is a journey that we've traveled, each of us on our own exodus. I'd like to share with you a reading that is so profound. It's from the New American Haggadah by Jonathan Safran Foer and Nathan Englander. Their introduction I find to be very beautiful. Please listen for a moment. Here we are gathered to celebrate the oldest continually practiced ritual in the Western world, to retell what was arguably the best known of all stories, to tell and take part in the most widely practiced Jewish holiday. We are here as we were last year and as we hope to be next year. We are here as the night descends in succession over all the Jews of the world, with a book in front of us. Jews have a special relationship to books, and the Haggadah has been translated more widely and reprinted more often than any other Jewish book. It is not a work of history or philosophy, not a prayer book, a user's manual, timeline, poem, a pamphlet, and yet it is all these things. The Torah is the fundamental text, the foundational text for Jewish law. But the Haggadah is our book of living memory. We are not merely telling the story here. We're being called to a radical act of empathy. Here we are, embarking on an ancient perennial attempt to give human life, our lives, dignity. This is the message. This is the message of Passover. When we say Avadim Hayinu, we remember that we were slaves once. We remember how far we as a people have traveled, and we shall never forget our obligation to care for others, to lift them up, to have empathy, to provide freedom for those in other lands who are oppressed, but more importantly, to give freedom from fear and freedom from bad feelings, freedom from the things that may bind our families from being who they could best be. This holiday, around the table or over a Zoom, it's a time from liberation, a time of liberation. Let us restore the dignity to all humanity. Let us reach to each other in love. I wish you a Chag Sameach. May this be a joyous Passover.
Kadeish urchatz, Karpas yachatz, Maggid rachza, Motzia matzah, Maror Korach, Shulchan orech, Tzafon barech, Hallel nirtzah.
Almost all of our rituals and holidays are sanctified through wine. As we bless the wine, we also bless the holiday or ritual we are celebrating. Tonight, we drink 4 cups of wine, each in honor of a promise made by God to redeem the Israelites from bondage. In Exodus 6, God's promise contains 4 aspects of liberation. WHC, I will bring you out from the burdens of the Egyptians. V'hitzalti, I will deliver you from servitude. V'ga'alti, I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment. V'lakachti, and I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God. To fully be liberated, the first step is to become aware of the pain, the burden of servitude. The second step is the actual deliverance from servitude and the knowledge that we must help others to be free of their bondage. The third aspect is the recognition that God is our Redeemer, which culminates in the final aspect of liberation, a covenant between God and the people of Israel to belong to each other. We honor that covenant now through our celebration of this Passover Seder, and we raise our cups together. I invite you to join me in the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. L'chaim.
Orchat, our ritual hand washing that we do without a blessing, in other years might seem kind of silly, redundant even, since we know that we're going to wash our hands later on in the service. But this year is different. This year we understand the need to cleanse ourselves before we go in to wash with a blessing, before we go in to have a relationship with God. So I'm going to lead us now in a creative washing ritual for this year, the year that has just passed. Often when we wash hands ritually, we do so 3 times, which is what we're going to do here. We're going to wash our hands once in honor of the past, once in honor of the present, and once in hopes of the future. So we take our water and we think of something in this past year that we would like to cleanse ourselves of. And then we think about where we are right now in this moment. The chair beneath us, the people around us. We are grateful for this moment right here. And then we look towards the future. What do we hope to happen between this Passover and next? What do we wish for our family, for our friends, for our world, for ourselves? We let the waters drip from our hands as we honor our past, present, and future.
Karpas is traditionally that moment in the Seder when we celebrate this season of the year by taking a little bit of the green of spring, represented by parsley or other green vegetable that grows from the ground, and dipping it in salt water, which is reminiscent of the tears our ancestors shed when they were slaves in Egypt so many years ago. And we recite the blessing, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pri ha'adamah, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, who creates the fruit of the earth. Now, it's a little bit to eat, and we know we have a long way to go before we get to the meal in the Seder, and so this also is reminiscent of the custom that our rabbis have taught was part of the Greco-Roman symposium from which the Seder actually evolved and developed. And so there's a tradition as well of having additional dips and appetizers, vegetables, celery, carrots, or other vegetables that grow in the earth with kosher for Passover types of dips like guacamole or hummus, which is considered now by the new rules of Kitniot is considered acceptable during Passover. perhaps a hard-boiled egg in salt water, or maybe gefilte fish in horseradish. But you can continue dipping, eating lightly so that you are able to sustain yourself until the meal and not fill yourself up. And so there's a blessing that you can recite over those items. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shahakol nehiyeh bidvaro. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who creates everything by the divine word. B'te'avon.
This is a holiday of freedom, but it's a holiday of brokenness too. So as we reach the stage of our Seder called Yachatz, we take the middle piece of matzah. There are 3 pieces of matzah. You take the middle piece of matzah and you break it in half. You then ask the children around the table to close their eyes. You'll find a place around the house to hide this piece of matzah. It will become the afikomen, which is found at the end of the Seder after the meal is done. But this is a time before we begin our meal portion of the Seder, as we delve into the story of Passover, where we're asked to remember the brokenness of the world, where we're asked to acknowledge the world not as a whole, but as a broken place. And as we break this Passover matzah, we do so knowing and praying that at some point it will be restored. At some point the world will be made whole again. And through our efforts later in the Seder of finding the afikomen, that wholeness and that peace very well may come from us.
The Maggid, the story, the central part of the Seder. I'd like to do it with you with a series of questions in hope that you will spend some time. I'll do this in a way that I hope you'll stop, answer the questions, but then I'm going to take you through the story from the very, very beginning. Who is the first Jew? Abraham. Yes, you're correct. And who is Abraham's wife? Yes, Sarah. You're right. But both of their names change. She is Sarai, becomes Sarah, and they have a son named Isaac. Correct. And he had a brother from another mother, the maid hand servant of Sarah, who is known as Hagar. You're absolutely correct. Who had a son, the youngest son of Abraham, whose name is, correct, Ishmael. And Ishmael becomes the father of what great nation and great religion? Islam. Very good. Now Isaac gets married to who? That's correct, Rebecca. Isaac is so good looking, she falls off the horse when he comes out. Lifnot Arav, and she went out to meditate and see and looked up and saw Isaac. He saw Rebecca for the very first time. They get married, and Isaac and Rebecca, they have how many kids? Correct. They have 2 sons. Their names are, yes, Jacob and Esau. Esau meaning Adom, rodi, red. Jacob meaning the heel. He came out holding on to the heel of his brother, and they don't get along so well. But the story tells us, because they're twins, it teaches that it's neither nature nor nurture, but our own free will. It is how we conduct ourselves of who we will be in this world. Now, they don't get along so well, and Jacob steals what from Esau? Correct, his birthright. But what does he do to do it? He offers him a bowl of, correct, lentil soup. That's so good. Now, Jacob goes off to live with his father-in-law because, actually live to the man who will become his father-in-law, to his mother's brother, and he goes out to live with Laban, and Laban has 2 daughters. What are those women's name? That is correct. Rachel and Leah. Now, he falls madly in love and works for 7 years for the right to marry who? That's correct, Rachel. But he gets fooled and ends up marrying, that's correct, Leah. And he then works another 7 years, and who does he marry? He marries Rachel finally. Between the 2 and a handmaid servant, he has how many children? We would think it would be 12, but don't forget, they're 12 sons and who else? 1 daughter. named. Think of the red tent. Dinah. Yes, Dinah is the daughter. So Jacob's sons names are, you should write them down and see if you can get all 10. In birth order, they are Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun. Dinah is born in between. Joseph, and the youngest is, that's correct, Benjamin. I usually remember them by going through the alphabet, and that's a good way of remembering all of them. So Joseph ends up staying in Egypt, and his 2 sons are adopted by his father, and that is Ephraim and Manasseh, and those become the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, Joseph had a little bit, he was the youngest, next to youngest son, his younger brother, and the favorite of his father, Jacob. And Jacob gave him something that none of the other brothers had. What was that? Yes, a coat of many colors. And the coat of many colors got Joseph into a little bit of trouble. Joseph would show it off, he'd walk around, and his brothers didn't think so kindly of him. His father sent him out to find his brothers, and what happens? There's a man, an unnamed man, who says they went that way. Joseph comes, and Joseph eventually is thrown into a pit. Now, it's an interesting thing, because this is a metaphor for all of us. Joseph is deep in the pit, but he hears life going on all around him. He hears his brothers speaking, and that is what it must be like for somebody who's in an abyss, who's in pain, who may be lost, who sees the world going all around them. And so Joseph being in the pit reminds us to also to be empathetic for those who live in pain and yet see the world and hear the world all around them. So Joseph is put into a pit, his brothers leave, a caravan comes along, they take Joseph out, and Joseph is sold into slavery into what country? Yes, Egypt. He's in Egypt, he gets put into the house of Potiphar, and Potiphar's wife thinks he's pretty hot looking. She makes a pass at him, Potiphar gets a little bit upset, and Potiphar sends Joseph to jail. In the jail, who does Joseph meet? Joseph, by the way, had told his brothers about his dreams. What was his dream that he told his brothers? That there were 10, 12 stalks, and they all bow down to the other stalk of corn, meaning that they would someday bow to him. So Joseph was an interpreter of dreams. He goes and he's put in jail with the butler and the baker and, of course, the candlestick maker. And by the time they're in jail, the butler comes out and he remembers that Joseph has a talent for interpreting dreams. And whose dream does Joseph interpret? Yes, he interprets Pharaoh's dreams. He is told that there are 7 fat cows and 7 skinny cows. And that means that there are going to be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. And Joseph tells the Pharaoh to prepare with the 7 years of plenty for the 7 years of famine. And Joseph is abiding and running everything. When Jacob sends his children down, his sons down, to do what? There's a famine in Canaan. And he sends his children, his sons down to go get food from Egypt. And behold, what does Joseph see coming before him, asking for food for their family? It is none other than his brothers. And when his brothers come, he slips what into the bag of one of the brothers? He slips a golden cup. And the cup is the Pharaoh's cup. And he says, no, not until your father comes back. Your youngest son stays here. Your youngest brother, and that would be Benjamin, his own brother. And in the end, he reveals and he says the famous line to his brothers, Ani Yosef Achicha. I am Joseph, your brother. And so that is how we get ourselves to Egypt.
מה נשתנה הלילה הזה מכל הלילות, מכל הלילות, שבכל הלילות אנו אוכלים חמץ ומצה, חמץ ומצה. הלילה הזה, כולו מצה. הלילה הזה, כולו מצה. שבכל הלילות אנו אוכלים שאר ירקות, שאר ירקות. הלילה הזה, מרור, מרור. הלילה הזה, מרור, מרור. שבכל הלילות אין אנו מטבילין אפילו פעם אחת, אפילו פעם אחת. הלילה הזה, שתי פעמים. הלילה הזה, שתי פעמים. שבכל הלילות אנו אוכלים בין יושבין ובין מסובין, בין יושבין ובין מסובין. הלילה הזה, כולנו מסובין. הלילה הזה, כולנו מסובין.
But our Haggadah, which now you know and you can begin and read in the story, begins by the fact of saying, Avadim hayinu, we were slaves. But what does it begin with? There arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. And so that is how we get in there and we begin our story. And Pharaoh thinks that there are too many slaves. These slaves that are down in Egypt, they're just too many. These Israelite slaves are too many. So he decides he's going to solve the problem by doing what? Killing the very firstborn male.
Avadim hayinu, hayinu, ata b'nechorin, b'nechorin. Avadim hayinu, ata b'nechorin. Avadim hayinu, ata b'nechorin, b'nechorin. Avadim hayinu, ata b'nechorin, b'nechorin. Avadim hayinu, ata b'nechorin. Avadim hayinu, ata b'nechorin, b'nechorin.
And so we are told of the story of one mother saving one child by putting him into what? Yes, a basket in a bulrush in the Nile. And his name is Moses, which means to bring forth, to take out of the water. And Moses is taken out of the water by whom? Yes, Pharaoh's daughter. And he grows up where? In the palace. And who does Pharaoh's daughter bring? A young woman, his sister, Miriam, to take care of him. And she brings a wet nurse who will take care of him, which is his own mother. And so Moses grows up in the desert, in the palace, and then I'm getting ahead of myself. He grows up in the palace, and one day he sees something that bothers him greatly. He sees one of the people he knows as his own kind, a Hebrew slave, being beaten by a taskmaster. And what does he do? I know if you're in the ECC, we told you that he punched him in the nose, but actually you're old enough now to know that he kills them. And Moses becomes a fugitive, and he has to flee Egypt. He can't go back to the palace because he fears he'll be punished. So he flees and he goes to the desert. And in the desert, he meets a Midianite priest. That Midianite priest's name is, I'll give you a hint, think Beverly Hillbillies. You got it. Jethro. Jethro is indeed the one who takes Moses in, and he becomes a herder for Jethro in the desert. He finds his wife and marries Jethro's daughter. And then when he's out in the desert one day, what happens? He stumbles upon a bush that is what? Yes, it's burning, but what is it not doing? It's not being consumed. Teaching us that we may have revelation going on in our own fireplaces, but we don't take the time to pay attention. And Moses pays attention and he hears God tell him to go down. Moses, tell old Pharaoh to let my people go.
When Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they couldn't stand, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. It was a dark and stormy night, let my people go. When Moses led the Israelites, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go.
But then what happens? Moses goes and faces Pharaoh, but Pharaoh will not. No, I will not let my people, your people go. Even though he asked to go out, he refuses. And in fact, the story tells us that what happens to Pharaoh's heart? His heart is hardened. And Pharaoh refuses until there happens to be something that is unbelievable. It is the 10 plagues.
Dam, blood, tzvardeya, frogs, kinim, lice, arov, wild beasts, dever, cattle disease, shechin, boils, barad, hail, arbe, locusts, choshech, darkness, makat bechorot, death of the firstborn.
2 object lessons I'd like to tell you about these plagues. 1, why is it that darkness is a plague? How many of us are scared of the dark? Why? Because in the dark, we can't be seen and we can't see anyone else. Loneliness, darkness is our greatest fear. And it is the only plague that we say is still in play today. That we can't see other people. And sometimes we are not seen. It is the one plague that we can eradicate by love and kindness and bringing light and warmth into the world. The last of the plagues is the killing of the firstborn. And why is that the last plague? Because we believe in measured justice. God gave Pharaoh 9 other opportunities before God did to Pharaoh what Pharaoh did first to the Jewish people. We should always be measured in our justice. And what happens? He says, let my people go, and after the death of the firstborn, they are gone. And how do we know that the death of the firstborn happened? And how do we know and get the name for this very house? Because we marked our doors with the shank bone, the blood of the lamb that is on our Seder plate. We marked our house because we had to stand up. Now, honestly, if these days of the pandemic, if the Domino's or the Bolus or DoorDash can find your house, don't you think an angel of God, even without GPS, could find out where the Jews lived? Why did we need to mark our house doors with blood? Why do we still put a mezuzah up on our door, symbolic of that we should mark the doorpost of our house, as we learn in the Via Hafta? The reason is because we have to be willing to recognize and put ourselves in the game. We couldn't stand on the sidelines. We had to say that we were willing to make a sacrifice for freedom. We were willing to say we were Jews. We were willing to let Pharaoh and his people know that we were not going to be slaves anymore. This is a very important lesson for us. We can't stand on the sidelines. When there's racial equality, when there's anti-Semitism, when there's bigotry of any type, we as Jews must stand up. We must mark our doorposts and remember that we can't stand on the sidelines. We must through action. And that's the last thing that we learn. We go through the desert, we're going, Pharaoh changes his mind, he goes after him. We go to and we cross the Sea of Reeds. And I love my famous story of Shmuel and Irving. They're the last two Jews to cross the sea, and they're kvetching the whole way. Oh my God, look at that fish, the mud. These are new sandals. They get to the other side, and they can't decide why they're singing Mi Chamocha Ba'elim Adonai. How glorious and wondrous. They missed the miracle because they were kvetching. They didn't see the goodness, the beauty, the miracle that God had saved them. Let us not be like Shmuel and Irving. Let us be like Miriam, who sang and danced with timbrels. And we sing Mi Chamocha Ba'elim Adonai. How glorious and wondrous is God, because we have the gift of having made it through to the other side. I hope your family is intact. I hope that you haven't had a loss. But even if you've had a loss, I hope you have memory. And I hope that you remember that this Exodus story is what has empowered people for centuries to stand up for freedom, for justice, and for truth. The last of these is the story of how we got across the Sea of Reeds. There's a Jew by the name of Nachshon ben Aminadav. He is the one who walks into the water all the way up almost to his nostrils, and then the seas part. Only by action. Jews show their belief by doing mitzvot, by doing good, by doing social justice, by gathering around the Seder table and telling our story and letting the values of our story live in us. I'd like you to take a moment or two at your Seder table and think about freedom. Freedom. What do we need to do to win it? What do we need to do to make it real in our day? Hag Sameach.
We now come back to our wash basin. After hearing our Passover Seder, our Passover story, we allow those words to wash over us just as we allow the water to wash over our hands. This time we do share a blessing. We share a blessing that means, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who loves us with mitzvot and commands us to wash ourselves, to wash our hands. And we do that ritual now. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al natilat yadayim.
We are almost ready for our meal, but just a few more blessings remain. The first is the blessing of the bread and the matzah. After reciting the blessings, it is tradition to eat the matzah while reclining to the left. It was custom for slaves to eat quickly on their feet so they could get right back to work. Only those who were free were able to sit and recline while they were eating. People would recline to the left so that their right hand was free to hold the food and the drinking vessel. It was also custom for people to lean on a cushion while eating. As we say our blessing, I invite you to recline, perhaps on a cushion, leaning to the left, and say the blessings with me. We will begin first with the motzi. And before tasting our matzah or bread, matzah of course, we will then immediately continue with the blessing over the matzah. And only after both blessings are said are we free to delight in our first taste of matzah. We join together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al achilat matzah. B'teavon.
This section of our service, after we eat that first bite of matzah, is called Maror, where we are asked to eat a bitter herb. I like to call this the "it only gets better from here" portion of your Passover Seder. Because before you dive into all of the foods that you've been looking forward to eating for this past little while, you take a bit of usually horseradish, dip it in the charoset, that delicious mix of nuts and spices, and you take a bite. This part of our service reminds us of the bitterness of slavery. And it reminds us in a way that doesn't use our minds, it doesn't even ask us to use our imaginations, but it brings us in with taste and with smell to that sharpness, to that bitterness, to that overwhelming feeling of what slavery must have been. And so even if you have a hard time imagining what it must have been like to be in that kind of hardship, to be enslaved, have a bite of maror, feel that bitterness before you move on to the rest of the Seder.
So we've just had our matzah and our maror, which we've eaten separately. But in the days when the temple stood, Rabbi Hillel of the Sanhedrin had a tradition of taking together the Paschal lamb, the Pesach sacrifice, the matzah and the maror, and eating them all together in what we would call today a sandwich. Now, of course, Rabbi Hillel preceded the Earl of Sandwich, who is famous for coining that phrase or earning that name, by hundreds and hundreds of years. But we continue to maintain this custom as part of our Passover Seder. So after we've had the matzah and the maror separately, having our Korach, our sandwich of a little bit of charoset, and I have some Ashkenazic traditional charoset, as well as some Sephardic charoset as a nod to my Sephardic Spanish roots. Charoset made with oranges, dates, and apricots, sometimes a little cinnamon, a little bit of maror thrown in. And we have Korach. B'teavon.
So we've reached the point in our Seder where you are full, you couldn't have another bite, and now you have another bite. This is the time called safun, literally meaning hidden away, where our children or the adults in the room go and look for the hidden half of the afikomen, that hidden part of matzah that was stashed away somewhere in the beginning of the service. We bring that back, make that full piece of matzah again as a way of symbolizing the wholeness of the world for which we pray. And we eat that afikomen. We have that extra bite. Now, I never found the afikomen. My entire childhood, it was always my siblings or cousins. I was never good at finding the afikomen. I was always good at eating when I was already full. And so we eat when we are already full. We luxuriate in this sense of freedom that we enjoy today. We compare where we are now to where our ancestors were, as in haste and in hurry they celebrated that very rushed first Passover Seder. And here we get to take our time. We have an extra bite as we enjoy our freedom today.
We have eaten, our tummies are full, and we are satisfied. And now it is time to thank God for our food. This year, we have seen food insecurity plague our country and our world. People who never thought they would have to worry about putting food on their table are worried. They are worried tonight, and they have been worried for so many nights since last Passover to this evening. If there is ever a time to do the full Birkat Hamazon and really thank God for the miracle of food that we have on our tables this evening, I encourage you, tonight is the night to do it. If that's not in your practice, I ask that you say these words written in Aramaic, found in our Talmud, that also thank God for the food that we have eaten. We thank God that we're not hungry tonight, and we say, Richrachamana Malkad Alma Ma'are Dechai Pita. Blessed is the merciful one, ruler of the world, creator of this food. And we say together, Amen.
Hallel is a selection of psalms that we chant during our holidays and at the beginning of each month. The singing of these psalms heightens our joy and celebration in these special moments. There are two versions of Hallel: a full Hallel, which contains Psalms 113 through 118. The Chetzi Hallel, or half Hallel, contains the same psalms, but removes sections from Psalms 115 and 116. On Passover, Hallel is recited every day of the festival, including during the Seder. The first day we recite the full Hallel. On the rest of the days, we recite the half Hallel, because as the Passover story unfolds through the Torah chanting each day, we recognize that our liberation brought suffering to the Egyptians. We temper our joy to commemorate their suffering and their drowning at the sea on the final day of our liberation. As we join together in Hallel, I invite you to join me in Psalm 114, B'tzeit Yisrael Mimitzrayim, when Israel came out of Egypt. B'tzeit Yisrael Mimitzrayim, Beit Yaakov me'am lo'ez, Hayta Yehuda lekodsho, Yisrael mamshelotav, Hayam ra'av ayanos, Hayarden yisov le'achor, Harim rakedu chelim, Givaot kivnei tzon, Malecha hayam kitanus, Hayarden tisov le'achor, Harim tirkedu chelim, Givaot kivnei tzon, Milifnei Adon chuli aretz, Milifnei Eloi Yaakov, Ahochi hatzur agamayim, Chalamish lemayno mayim.
The nirtzah is the conclusion of the Seder. Traditionally, we say, B'shana haba'a b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. Jerusalem, which can be translated as Ir Shalom, city of peace, a place of peace. That's what we hope for. Each year at the end of the Seder, I wander in and look at this chest. This chest is the last remnant of the furniture that was brought from my grandparents' home in Nazi Germany. It was packed up on a little before they left and came unbeknownst to them after they'd served time in concentration camps. With German efficiency, their furniture showed up in America, even though they had been shipped to a concentration camp. The furniture made it here. It was in my grandparents' home, and this chest, this cloth, it reminds me that for us as a Jewish community, our best days are yet to come. This pandemic has been difficult, but Washington Hebrew Congregation has been just that, a congregation, a community that believes our best days are yet to come. So we end this Seder with B'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. B'shana haba'a b'yachad, next year together. Our best days are yet to come. I wish you and your family a Hag Sameach, a happy and good and joyous Pesach.
Leshana Habaa, Leshana Habaa, Leshana Habaa B'Yerushalayim.